Hello and welcome to News in Depth here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Mounting pressure is falling on Hungary and Slovakia to end their reliance on Russian crude and natural gas. At the UN General Assembly, US President Donald Trump called NATO's dependence inexcusable, urging Viktor Orban to break ties with Moscow. Both Hungary and Slovakia, however, are resisting, despite viable alternatives like the Adria pipeline and the Polish-Slovak gas interconnector. With the EU preparing tariffs on Russian imports, is this really about infrastructure or political will? Well, joining me to discuss that is Jakub Kapiszewski. He's a TVP World business editor. Kuba, welcome. As always, great to have you here.
Good to be here.
A pleasure. So let's start with President Trump's statement. I think we have a soundbite of that, and we get back and I'll get your view on it.
China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy.
Right, so he mentions China and India, but that's a topic for another conversation, our next one, I hope. But he's talking about NATO members, and clearly he's talking about countries like Hungary and Slovakia not weaning themselves off Russian gas and oil. Does this surprise you? Is this putting pressure on those two countries? What do you think?
It's absolutely putting pressure on those countries, and one could say it's about time, because the Europeans Brussels weren't able to convince nor the government in Budapest nor the government in Bratislava that they should, in a very short time frame, wean themselves off Russian energy. They've kept buying it. They've kept buying it at a discount. So this meant good prices for them. And there weren't really any signs that those two countries are trying to shift their position on that they are preparing some plan B on where to buy energy supplies in the event that Russian supplies will dry off.
Right. Okay. So it sounds as though they're slow walking. I mean, we'll come to their performance on cutting dependence on Russian energy sources. But now we have Donald Trump putting pressure on them. The European Union is talking about putting tariffs on Russian gas and oil imports into the European Union. Is that going to multiply that pressure? And do you think Hungary and Slovakia are finally going to come to heel as a result of the combination of those?
Basic reason because those two countries have been buying those supplies is, well, because they are landlocked. So not unlike Poland, which can just build an LNG facility on the Baltic shore, those two countries don't have this possibility. They have to rely on existing network of connections going through other countries to secure their supplies. And of course, the pipelines that have been built many years ago, pipelines from Russia to Europe, are the most obvious way to get energy supplies for them. And also, they've been buying it at a discount. Right? We have to remember that. So putting tariffs on those energy supplies actually makes the price of this input much higher and will possibly disincentivize them from doing so in the future.
OK, so we're now in a situation where Russian gas and oil is not going to be as cheap as it has been thus far because of the tariffs, and therefore perhaps the incentive for those two countries to stop buying Russian gas and oil is increased. But there is another reason that they give, or Slovakia specifically gives, for not buying other alternative sources. I think we have a soundbite on that one, a statement by the Slovakian foreign minister.
We used to build the infrastructure, I mean the gas pipeline and crude pipeline, for decades. And we don't have any other options which could be sustainable and also the price reasonable and so on. So it takes time to diversify this. So that's why we are calling for some kind of empathy.
Right, he's asking for empathy there. But, I mean, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, many countries, including Poland, of course, have completely divested themselves of Russian energy supplies. Your thoughts?
Well, to actually understand how little effort those guys have put into diversifying, you have to look at the data. So if Slovakian government could say that, for example, listen, before the start of the full-scale invasion, 80% of our natural gas was coming from Russia, but now it's 50%. So we've made some effort, right? We have a long way to go, but we did something, and we're just asking for a little bit more time. This is an argument everyone would sympathize or empathize with, right? However, the situation is that Slovakia is still getting 80% of its, more than 80% of oil from Russia and more than 70% of gas. And it has been stable for 4 years since the start of the full-scale invasion. So we see that very little effort has been put into diversifying. So this is the first point when we hear a Slovakian politician saying, we need you guys to empathize with us. It doesn't struck us as a very, very true-ish statement, so to speak, right? Because there was virtually no effort on their side to diversify. So where should this sympathy come from?
Right, exactly. The foundation for that request seems a bit strange. I mean, we have, I believe, a graphic with some pipelines on it. The Adria pipeline, which is an option available. And what we're hearing from those two countries is that basically it's too expensive using gas coming through there. So the infrastructure already exists. Now they're going back to, well, it's not the infrastructure really, it's the cost. Is Adria energy through the Adria pipeline more expensive?
This is actually it's a trade secret, right? For how much a certain company buys gas or oil or any other kind of energy supply. This is between those two companies, so it's a trade secret. They will never tell you the truth about it. But what you've mentioned is that Slovakia and Hungary are just a couple of Central and Eastern European countries. And a couple of years ago, we all had the same problem of over-reliance on Russian energy. And many other countries have made tremendous effort to discontinue buying Russian energy supplies. And Poland is a good example. In 2020, 67% of Polish oil came from Russia. Now it's 0%. More than 50% of natural gas came from Russia. Now it's down to 0%. And you see the same story all over the Central and Eastern Europe. Baltic states, very good example. Czech Republic ended reliance on Russian oil and natural gas this year. Bulgaria, very similar story. They've been buying Russian gas. Now they are buying American gas or Norwegian gas that's coming to a LNG facility in Greece and is being pumped throughout a very short pipeline connecting Greece and Bulgaria. So all those countries made some effort. And at the same time, those two outliers are just still giving statements, this is too expensive, there's not enough infrastructure. Infrastructure is in place.
Exactly. The infrastructure is in place. The Adria pipeline is in place. There is another piece of infrastructure, isn't there? And that's the interconnector pipeline between Poland and Slovakia. Tell us about that.
Exactly. So a couple of years ago, like a decade ago, we had a situation in Europe where every country basically had its own energy infrastructure and they weren't talking to each other. Well, this is a more pronounced problem in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe than in Western Europe. So due to some pressure from the local governments, Brussels even created a special financing instrument to create those interconnections so those systems could speak to each other. And Poland-Slovakia interconnector is a prime example of this effort. It's actually quite capacious for a gas pipeline interconnector type. It can 5 billion cubic meters of natural gas can flow in one direction. So this is enough to cover Slovakia's needs. So we have this pipe. It has been built a couple of years ago, and it's been sitting empty because there's only one Slovakian company that actually buys natural gas from Poland via this pipe. And this isn't the biggest company on a natural gas market in Slovakia. This is the second or the third biggest. ZP Energia is its name. And at the other time, you have the state-owned company. We haven't seen any news reports about them approaching Orlen, which would be a subsidiary, which would be intermediary in this transaction, approaching them for very big contract, like 3 billion cubic meters a year, right? So there is infrastructure in place.
And there's a gas supply in place.
There is a gas supply in place because Poland has been actually laying groundwork from decoupling from Russia for many, many years now. So we have the Baltic pipe. This is the pipe that connects the country with Norwegian Sea. This is where we get most of our natural gas from. And we also have LNG facility at Świnoujście. And soon we will have another one in Gdańsk. So we can bring enough natural gas to Poland to divert some of it to Slovakia. And we have infrastructure to do that.
All of Slovakia's needs.
Absolutely.
Right.
But they are not asking for it.
They're not asking for it. Okay, so let's put this together. We have the pipelines. We have the Adria pipeline. We have the interconnector. We have the prices of Russian energy are going to go up. We have other countries in the region who have completely divested themselves of Russian energy, so it is possible. So what is it that is stopping Slovakia and Hungary from really doing the same thing and moving away from Russian energy?
When we are talking with experts on TVP World, and we had many talks about this because we are looking for an answer for this question, the most obvious one was the lack of political will. But it's a kind of, like you can say about many things that it's just lack of political will. So basically there's an economic interest behind it because Russia lost so many customers in Europe. In order to sell their energy products, they lowered the prices. So basically Slovakians and Hungarians have been receiving oil and natural gas at a discount, 10-15% compared to what they would be paying on a global market. And this discount is what their energy companies basically pocketed. So this is just, it's an income. It's a net profit, right? Because you are still selling gasoline or diesel at the same price you would sell it if you bought on the global market. But because this price of this crucial input, oil, is lower, you just pocket the difference.
And who pockets the difference?
Companies that are buying the oil and they are refining it. So, for example,
Slovakian and Hungarian companies that are doing those things.
Yeah, when it comes to oil, it's MOL, so a Hungarian very big energy company that also owns a refinery in Slovakia, Slovnaft. There actually is a think tank in Bulgaria which tracked the financial statements of MOL, which is a listed company, publicly traded company, so everyone can see it. And in one of the reports, they made a beautiful graph showing the difference between what Slovakians and Hungarians paid for Russian oil and the global price, the market price. And with this difference, how the earnings of MOL have fluctuated and changed. And when this difference was the biggest, how the EBITDA shot up and then just, leveled off a little bit.
Right, so basically it's commercial interests run by the large oil companies that are influencing political direction, which is a slightly dangerous route for Orban and Fico to take, is it not, considering their obligations to the EU and to NATO. Your thoughts?
Yes, but it seems that those guys, they have to... they are not afraid of it. This is basically what we've been seeing throughout the 4 years since the full-scale invasion started. And they've been using this as a bargaining chip, which is very important. So, for example, Hungary found itself in a position that due to some problems with human rights issues and rule of law, they had the recovery funds, so a special pot of money that the European Union has given to member states after the COVID pandemic. They've seen those funds frozen. And from time to time, Brussels uses it as a bargaining chip to try to convince Hungarians to follow some measure.
So to penalise or to threaten to penalise.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So basically Brussels says, listen, guy, if you do this, we will unlock 500 million euros of these funds. Right. And this is how it has been going for the past 4 years.
Right.
But now the US president has used the so-called bully pulpit. So he's basically the presidential desk. And finally, there is some movement around here, right? Europe is suddenly saying, oh yeah, because Europe has a plan to phase out Russian energy. It's nothing new in Europe, but this plan said that we will phase out Russian energy by the end of 2027. Now we are hearing talk of moving this deadline to the end of next year. Ambitious, but achievable, right?
Well, clearly achievable. I mean, so many countries, including Poland, of course, have done it, and we're ahead of the EU is ahead of the timeline for a change, quite frankly, for the EU. But nonetheless, it is possible. What else can the EU and perhaps NATO do? Because Donald Trump was referring to NATO countries being reliant on Russian energy. Is there anything else that can be done to put pressure on these two countries, Hungary and Slovakia?
In the context of EU, well, we've seen for the past 4 years, diplomatic pressure hasn't really changed much, like those guys kept just buying Russian energy. But in the context of NATO, this is actually quite more complicated because this also includes countries that are not in the EU but are members of NATO. And by that I mean Turkey. And Turkey has been gobbling up Russian gas like crazy. So the question is, okay, all NATO countries, EU finds a solution for this Slovakia/Hungary problem. What about Turkey? Because Turkey is connected with Russia via 2 very big pipelines. It's going to be very hard to convince Erdogan to stop buying Russian gas because he also probably gets a discount. So it's good for him, it's good for his energy companies, which can then resell those products, and they actually do. They buy cheap Russian oil, they make gasoline of it, and then they export it because it's price competitive with gasolines or diesels made in other countries which have to rely on the global market for their supplies, right? So in this big game, let's diminish Russian exports, energy exports. Turkey is going to be an outlier. Because EU doesn't have, well, apart from diplomatic pressure, doesn't have an instrument that can force. Well, it can do something with the internal market. And there's been some talk, for example, Bulgaria, which has a very important gas pipeline which connects Turkey with Serbia. And this is the pipeline through which natural gas from Russia, from under the Black Sea, flows through Serbia and Hungary. And Bulgaria today said that starting 2026, they are finishing this pipeline off. So no Russian gas can flow, no Russian gas bought in a short-term contract will flow through its pipeline, through this pipeline, and by 2028, no Russian gas will flow through it at all. And Bulgaria actually has been making quite a lot of money on servicing this and operating this pipeline, 800 million euros a year. Which
is quite a lot for that country. And so no Russian gas going through Turkey into Europe in that way.
Via Bulgaria.
Via Bulgaria. Jakub, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you, as always, so much for your analysis.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this episode of News in Depth. Don't go away, there are lots more coming up. Goodbye.